Hello, everyone. I see we have a couple of people here already. My name is Annalie. I'm the VP of Customer Success at OfferZen. So I just want to welcome you to the OfferZen and Playrole webinar on global team scaling strategies. I'm very excited to have you here. Just going to give people a couple of minutes to join before I kick off the session. Feel free to grab some coffee, maybe a glass of wine, get comfortable. And in the meantime, maybe just drop your name and where you're from, company and location in the chat. I will be very keen to say hi to people from all over. Welcome, Nikita, all the way from Bangalore. Clarice, let us know if you're hiring in Mauritius. That sounds amazing. Thanks for joining us. And hi, Komokelo as well. Hi, Chriselle. Since we don't have a lot of people in the chat, I'm happy to do individual shout outs. It's really nice having all of you here. We're at 2 minutes in. I'm actually keen to get started. At OfferZen, we also use this 2-minute rule as the kind of cutoff for when we start a virtual meeting. 2 minutes is the new 10 minutes if you're doing a remote meeting versus an in-person meeting. And I'm keen to get started for the sake of the people that have joined already. Cool. So just welcoming everyone again. If you've just joined, my name's Annalie Marie. I'm going to be hosting tonight's event. I'm the VP of Customer Success at OfferZen. But before we dive in, I just want to share a little bit of context on the organizers behind tonight's event. For those of you that don't know, or maybe you just need a reminder, OfferZen is a developer talent marketplace. We were founded in sunny Cape Town in South Africa, where I'm also joining you from tonight, in 2016. So we're already a couple of years old. We've since expanded to what we like to refer to as Middle Earth, which is just a fancy way of saying like roughly the GMT plus 2 time zone. So that's most of the African continent and working into Europe as well. We've expanded into Europe over the last 2 years or so. Our marketplace helps over 2,000 companies in Africa and Europe hire curated, job-seeking software developers. And companies on OfferZen can directly reach out to skilled developers with upfront information about their tech stacks, salary, maybe their work history, experience as well. And it takes roughly 25 days on average to actually make those hires. So it's a really nice, quick time frame. Playrole is also a quick thank you to our co-organizer, Playrole. We work with them quite closely. They're one of our partners. They're a global workforce platform that empowers companies of all sizes to hire, pay, and manage a global workforce. So they handle international payroll, taxes, benefits, stock options, and compliance. And since they're run by the VAT IT group, which means they're already quite a big distributed business with over 25 years of tax and compliance experience. And they basically leverage that group infrastructure to make it easy for people and companies to come together and do big things, with the right tools and expert advice to guide them every step of the way, right? So if you're hiring across borders, Playrole is an excellent partner to help you figure out the logistics there. Great. So keen to jump into the event. We're here to chat about hiring and retaining top-tier software developers, which remains one of the most critical challenges for business growth, right? In budget-constrained environments, also making the wrong hire becomes even more costly. So finding the right fit for these critical hires is even more important than ever. It's definitely going to be a topic that we touch on tonight. And maybe you're feeling this is a bit of a bummer, talking about tight budgets. Maybe this is a budget as a trigger word for you. Don't worry. I do think that this is a great example of what we want to use community events for, right? We're here to share tips and tricks This is really about sharing our playbooks and advice and getting some under the hood strategies and practical tips for how to scale your team for maximum business impact, despite all the challenges that you might be facing on a financial sense, right? And working with those tight budgets. Seeing lots of hellos in the chat. Thank you so much. Really nice having you guys join from all over. I'm quickly going to run through some rules of engagement before we get started. First of all, just remember you can see us, but we can't see you. So if you put your hand up, we're not ignoring you. We just don't know that it's up. Feel free to use the chat in the meantime. There's also some emoji reactions that you can use to interact with us. If you drop off the video, you can come back at any point in time. You just use the same link that you used to, what you received when you registered for the event. If you have a friend who's joining late, please encourage them to join anyway. It doesn't disrupt the flow of the webinar at all. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can just post them in the questions tab on the right-hand side of your dashboard. I'm going to make sure that we spend some time on questions by the end of the webinar, but just to keep the flow of the conversation going, I'm not going to be checking them while chatting to our speakers. And finally, please use the chat tab as you guys have already done. If you're joining a little bit late, please tell us what your name is, where you're joining from, company and location. And yeah, big hello to everyone that's joining us from all over the world. Really cool to have you joining us this evening. Awesome. If you don't mind, let's just do a quick test drive. Maybe if you haven't introduced yourself, do that so long. And if you have settled in, ready to go, can you give me a couple of emoji reactions so I know that you know what to do when you want to respond to what our speakers share this evening? There you go. So everyone's very excited to be here. Excellent. Thumbs up. Appreciate that. Great. Thanks, everyone. Really, really appreciate that. Now, let's quickly introduce our speakers to the stage. You've already heard a lot from me, so I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. Lawrence, how about we start with you? Where are you joining us from, and what experiences do you have to share with the audience this evening?
Thanks, Annelie. Currently, I'm on vacation in South Africa, but I make my home in the Netherlands. I work for BBD now for a couple of years. I form part of a team in the Netherlands to establish a base for us over there in Europe. And we've been growing well over the past 4 years and growing to a very nice size. And a lot of help from Afazin in that process as well. BBD Software is an international software development consultancy firm. And we have turned 40 this year. So we've been in the industry for 40 years. And we've gone just over 1,000 developers within the past 2 years globally. And I myself work for a client in Germany, and I am a full stack developer working in both the front end and the back end. That's it for me.
Excellent. That's a lot of experience to draw from in this evening's conversations. Felix, how about you?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Felix. I'm German and live in South Africa. So I'm currently in Cape Town since 4 years, living here now. Before I started an enterprise software as a service company in Germany, in Berlin, called Flexperto, a communication cloud solutions, and sold that company in 2021 to a private equity player. And now embarking on a new mission with Project Y, which is a new approach to fight the youth unemployment on the African continent, which has really reached alarming numbers. And our goal with Project Y is to invest in underserved talents, provide them with education, with access to job opportunities, and with a holistic support system to not only get the skills ready to get into tech jobs, but also to stay in those tech jobs and become the high income earners of tomorrow. And maybe that's important. So I've hired a lot of talent from South Africa while I was still with my old company. So I've seen both sides now supporting the talents to get international jobs, but also from the employer sides hiring in South Africa specifically.
Nice. 100% agreed. I think it's lovely to have both of those perspectives. And part of the discussion tonight is going to be about opportunities in emerging markets. So I expect you to have some strong opinions and insights into how to make the most of South African talent, especially. Great. Thanks so much for introducing yourselves. quickly going to tease our audience poll. Alex, our events lead at OfficeN, is going to help me set that up. We're going to be asking you throughout the conversation, what's been your experience with hiring remotely? Have you done this before? Are you currently hiring for remote roles? Please let us know in the chat, or it should pop up and you can add your input there. I'm going to give it a bit of time and maybe just check in on that a little bit later. Great. So starting off, maybe setting the scene a little bit, one of the reasons why we're having this chat tonight is just, let's say, budgets overall are pretty tight. 2023 generally was quite a tough year for the tech industry. We're dealing with our toughest investor market probably in about a decade. And we saw lots of layoffs from big tech companies towards the end of 2022 and during 2023 as well, right? So lots of companies are restructuring, tightening up their hiring strategies and cutting budgets, which means that that's had an impact on how we think about scaling our teams and in particular our tech teams. Even though we see tech teams as this growth engine within businesses, belts are still needing to be tightened. How's this macroeconomic outlook affected the way you're thinking about your team setup and how you scale for impact? Maybe we can start with Lawrence.
Thanks, Annelie. Yes, it's unfortunate seeing the numbers being laid off from big tech companies, and we have definitely seen a lot of waves in the industry that's causing a lot of like the sine curve effect, where there's a lot of supply and low demand, and very quickly again the demand goes up and the supply goes down. So what we've been doing is trying our best to just stay on top of the job demand and try and anticipate what will be the next demand. From what we've seen right now, cloud professionals and data professionals are extremely high in demand, and that also makes it one of the areas where we have to be a lot more careful in employing. So we are very rigorous in our process of employing over there as well.
Got you. What about you, Felix? How's it impacted the way you're thinking about hiring?
Yeah, I mean, coming from a tech startup scale up in Germany, like funding has dried out among VC investors. A lot of companies have even closed or have like reduced their headcount significantly and laid off, especially also junior developers. And we see like a high uncertainty now in the market when it comes to hiring, driven on the one hand side by development of AI, where it's unclear like what kind of roles are actually still required, and also seeing that like less engineers can maybe do the work that has been done by more 5 or 10 years ago. And there's a lot of pressure to reduce cost, which on the one hand side means like to eventually lay off some people, but also to think about more effective like hiring also internationally, because a lot of companies, at least in Germany, like are still working a lot with also like local engineers. And for us, that was also one of the reasons why we have decided to look into South Africa for hiring. And another thing that we are seeing is that the demand for junior developers is reducing significantly. I mean, we've also seen that with larger outsourcing companies like Andela, for instance, on the African continent, that have really like more focused on mid and senior developers. But on the other hand side, like the good mid and senior developers, they become more and more expensive, and there also the salary differences are not as different anymore if you compare it between like South Africa or Germany. So it like that's a question that a lot of companies now need to ask themselves, like where do they find the right talent, how do they develop the right talent and retain the talent, because hiring remotely has a lot of challenges, especially when it comes to retention rates.
Yeah, with that sort of, it's a sort of a laundry list of lots of dynamics playing into the hiring market at the moment. What we say is the biggest insight or learning that you've had in the last year, starting with Felix.
Yeah, so I think for me, like founding now Project Y and looking where the demand is heading to in terms of the enterprises and the startups and scale-ups that are looking to hire tech, For me, a big insight was really like that on the one hand side, we see, there's such a big need for developers and like a gap between supply and demand. But on the other hand side, really much less interest in junior developers and much less interest in developing young talents. And this is, from my perspective, like looking also from a social impact on that, it's very hard for like these young graduates that like are full of energy and commitment to make it in their career, but it's super hard for them to get a job. And I think there is a chance for companies to tap into this talent pool if they make sure that they can develop their talent accordingly and onboard it in the right way, and make sure that they use this lower cost quality. So that was for me the biggest insight, this sharp drop in demand for junior developers.
Yeah, super interesting. I think we've definitely seen something similar on the OfferZen marketplace. And I think it's quite a challenge for junior developers to figure out how to pitch themselves in this market, right? So they might have a friend who graduated a year or two ahead of them who had a very different experience, right? If you came into the job market in 2022. Lawrence, what about you? What would you say is your main takeaway from the last year or so?
Well, I think Felix hit the nail on the head right there. And it's nothing new, this old chicken and egg problem where the industry demands a lot of experienced people, but none of them are willing to invest into growing these experienced people is still a problem that we see. And I think, again, we've mentioned the big tech letting people go is one of the circumstances that come from that, because there's a lot of fluctuation in people joining and moving around, never really getting an opportunity to grow. And if they're going to be firing people within 6 months or a year, they are not going to be investing in these younger tech professionals growing their careers. And like I've also mentioned, with the rapid changing demand in the industry, one of the things that we learned in the past year is we can actually draw from the rest of our business. We've got a long list of clients, and by getting together all of our unit leads and talking about what's coming down the pipeline within these clients, it's a good way to keep your ear on the ground in terms of what other developments in tech demand coming down the pipeline.
And another thing maybe also to add is like, developers used, I'm not a developer, so Lawrence, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like developers used Google like for a long time, right? Like to not necessarily write the code anymore, but now there's AI. So like we also see a discrepancy between developers that really understand how to use the AI tools and those who still live in the old world, and the ones that really use the AI tools effectively and have been trained on that, they are performing much more efficiently on the tasks that they're handed over.
Oh, that's absolutely a big disruption in the industry. I think the biggest challenges that come with these AI tools would just be privacy and security of data being uploaded to these models. But yes.
Super interesting. Yeah, it's a bit of a topic of conversation, I think, amongst our customers as well. Like, is it a bad thing if a candidate uses ChatGPT in a tech assessment? If it's okay for them to use it at work, why is it a bad thing at a tech assessment? So trying to find that right balance between actually being able to assess the level of skill that the person has, while still thinking in real world terms, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing. Lawrence, do you mind if I ask you about BBD's approach to this? Like, how are you striking the balance between like getting that senior talent in and maybe also developing more junior talent? Are you able to take those kinds of roles on at the moment, or is it on pause for a bit?
So that's the nice thing again about BBD and being in the industry for 40 years, having grown to the sizes that we are. We are one of the largest providers in South Africa of developers. And we have a very nice graduate program that's taken on, I think, 85 graduates within South Africa this year, and another 45, I think, in India. We also have our hub in India that's also grown to over 150 developers. That's also developing quite fast, which is it's a very big thing for us to celebrate as well. But yes, having been here, having built relationships with the clients, having formed trust with them, we are at the point within South Africa, for the most part, where the clients trust us to solve their problems, not necessarily saying, I want 3 senior developers and a data engineer. They come to us for solutions and not only code, essentially.
Love that. So you have a bit of flexibility in terms of like how you structure your team and how you invest in talent as well. Great.
Yes.
Before I dig into a very specific theme, are there other dynamics that you would say, okay, let me just do the spoiler. I want to talk a little bit about hiring the right person. When you have limited vacancies, trying to make sure you find the right person for that one hire, right? It kind of like raises the stakes on each individual hire. But before I get into that, what else is there that's making hiring hard at the moment? I've seen, for example, a lot of marketplaces or job boards are saying, the number of applications coming into job adverts is definitely increasing. Is anything else that we're missing? What's the dynamics that are making it so hard to hire at the moment? Starting with Felix.
Yeah. So for me, what was very hard when hiring remotely is to actually have a good feeling for the quality of the talent pool that I'm tapping into. So it becomes really important to actually assess also the soft skills ahead of time, and not every company is equipped to have like an application and admission process to vet the talent as you should have to vet it, right? So like it might make sense to outsource basically this vetting process to a certain extent to a trusted source, where okay, from that trusted source, I get the quality that I need, because you get so many requests from recruiters, like people applying, and you see like CVs and stuff, but like who really tells you? Is there like a certain certification that tells you, okay, this is like that person comes with the qualities and the soft skills and the work readiness and the cultural fit as well to work in your company. So that's on the quality. Other thing which makes it very hard to hire remotely is the onboarding of the talent and to have quality assurance, which ultimately leads to retention. So I've hired a lot of people in South Africa, and after a couple of months, so like once they have worked for Flexperto, they just get a better job offer and then they're gone. So like I think there is, on the one hand side, is the responsibility of the employer to make sure that you hire people with a long-term horizon, that you also invest in your talent and build a long-term relationship, and don't just see it as a cheap labor, so to say, that does some jobs, because then you risk that after 6 months they have you in the CV and now they hop on to the next opportunity that pays them like 5,000 euro more. And another thing is, like, especially if you hire like in South Africa, for instance, like there's load shedding, right? Not everyone has a stable infrastructure to work in. So like what we, for instance, are doing with Project Y is, for employers that are hiring for Project Y members, they can make sure that the people are work from a certain co-working space together with a community of peers, that there's a success manager that looks after them, that there are events, that they get upskilled all the time, so that actually we take a little bit the burden away from the employers that want to work with remote talent, but that don't have an office in South Africa and have like people there to like entertain the people, to make sure that there's a culture, etc., etc. So I think that is one of the challenges, like finding the right quality, keeping the people also long term, because investing in someone and onboarding someone takes time from like more senior people and costs you also money. And yeah, making sure that the people have the right infrastructure to work in and the right setup.
It's a theme with our advice to candidates as well. I mean, even if you're not necessarily interviewing for a remote role, a lot of interviewing is happening remotely. So just making sure you check your load shedding schedule, communicating super proactively with companies when you're in the process, definitely part of our kind of advice pack to candidates as well. Lawrence, what about you? What are some of the challenges that you've seen? What's making this hiring market a difficult one to navigate?
Well, I think it's a difficult one, full stop. Felix has gotten a lot of the points there. Some things that we've personally experienced is, I've just mentioned about BBD being a well-recognized brand in South Africa. But since moving to Europe, we are a new player over there, competing with a lot of the larger companies that have 80,000 plus consulting developers working for them. So that does add a lot of challenge for us when approaching candidates. One thing that I've also personally found is that it's consultancy is also a very tough sell to techies and developers. Even though it's a fantastic field to learn in because there's a lot of variety, it's people tend to lean towards product companies where they've got these clear growth paths and development paths and stuff like that. So it's one of the things that we've been giving a lot of attention to lately is to provide our people that join us some good career coaching and helping them achieve what they set out for their careers. And then lastly, one of the things that we also find difficult, and again, I think this comes back to the fact that we are competing with these other larger companies, is the salaries expectations are quite high for the high in demand roles. Like we've said earlier, cloud and data right now has a big demand. So it's a very competitive market in terms of being able to offer a competitive salary.
Maybe one point that was, and luckily there are solutions now, and we have Playroll as a partner today also in the webinar, is that for a German company or European company to hire someone overseas is obviously like a big legal risk. So like if I ask my investors, like, and we are in a due diligence, that's always like a question like that would come up, right? And where they say, oh, but like, how do we do that? Like in terms of compliance and legal, and with an employer of record model, you can now have certainty around that, and you can hire the people like a normal employee, but you don't have the effort of it, and you can outsource that service to an employer of record. And that's also something that we also therefore included in the Project Y membership model, because we see for an employer, this is one of the most relevant things as well, besides like the quality and the retention, that actually from a legal point of view, that's easy. I mean, for a German company, it's even hard to hire someone from Italy, right? And to make a contract with the EU. But yeah, so these are certainly also obstacles in the hiring, but there are good solutions out there with an employer of record model.
Great. I have a little bit of a sub-theme that I want to dig into, but before I do that, just wanted to check in on the poll. I see most of our participants are already or have previously hired remotely, so that's a nice fit for our subject matter. A couple are thinking about it or will be doing that soon, and then a small proportion haven't necessarily got experience with it. So the first theme I want to dig into a little bit is just something that's already popped up. That's this question of how do you find the right person? If you're hiring fewer people than before, this raises the stakes on each individual hire that you make. We also seem to be dealing with these sort of two parallel dynamics. The one being that there's a bit of noise in the market. Let's say lots of candidates who are looking for work and not as many positions available to them. And at the same time, quite tough competition for, let's say, more senior developers, top talent. So there's this weird dynamic where you have to like be able to filter through the noise and at the same time still be able to sell your value proposition as a company really well and effectively with those top candidates that you want to acquire. So obviously, hiring the wrong person is very expensive. I think both from a budget and time perspective, you've got a lot of people involved in the hiring process. And then also if you're working with smaller teams and tighter budgets, it makes a big impact on team morale as well. If you have someone join for a short stint, but it doesn't work out, it's going to be a big blow for the team. So thinking about all of these dynamics, keen to chat a little bit about how we test for what we're looking for when we interview developers, and get some tips and tricks from you guys as well. We talked a little bit about we talked about how it's tough hiring. So now my question is, what is making it so hard to find the right fit at the moment? What's the different factors leading to that? And Lawrence, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Well, I think it's always been hard. It's just become a little bit of a situation where we need to be a little bit more aware. We can't afford to just give somebody a try on a probation period. If I look at profiles, when we look at hiring people or interviewing people, we always look at some people who you're careful for the people who do overselling of their experience, overstating what they've done. Also overuse of buzzwords, people that may have been adjacent to certain technologies but not personally worked on it, that they would color in their profiles with these buzzwords. And another thing that's a red flag for us over there as well is when they said that we did that and we built this and we implemented that, instead of talking about their personal achievements and accomplishments within their specific roles. But I've done quite a bit of interviews in the past year, probably just over 50 interviews. And one of the things is to create a nice atmosphere, I think, within the interview, creating some casual conversation and it not just being a question and answer situation. And it's just one of those things that you build up the skill to be able to test for these people.
That's an interesting point you made around, maybe talking a big game about the technology that you've used, but maybe that's just something that someone else on the team did, like how, trying to be clear on your contribution. Is that something that you find you can test for in a screening call or an initial conversation, or is that something that you can only really find out in the tech assessment phase?
I don't think, well, even in the tech assessments, it won't always give you the true picture. It's one of those things where you will have to have the intuition and asking the right questions within the interview. It's one of the things that I've also thought about in terms of hiring remotely is what I've seen a lot with remote interviews is people prepare for interviews. Thus, they have all of these textbook answers ready. And that's also why it's always a good idea to have a curveball question built in there once you start going through some of the technical questions.
That's great. And also, yeah, I said this before, but if you've already done 50 interviews this year, lots of experience to draw from. Felix, what about from your perspective? Yeah, what's making it difficult to find the right fit in the current jobs market?
Yeah, I mean, we have launched our program like 3 weeks ago, Project Y, and we have received now 20,000 applications and within 3 weeks for 50 spots. So like we have built like a very interesting admission process. So like starting with eligibility criteria, but then like there's 40% that come out of that. Then the second phase is a mindset challenge, because for us, like actually the soft skills are even more important than the hard skills. I mean, there needs to be a certain set, but like it's very important to see things like motivation for achievement, like the work ethics and all these kind of soft skills. Then we have an AI admission manager. So we basically like, they do a video interview, they record themselves, we ask them questions that also change, and we record these questions because we cannot have interviews with 2,000 people. And then the AI analyzes the answers based on the model that we trained, that trained it. And then we have a personal interview process. And then the last step is basically they have a 1 month trial phase where they already start with like an education course where we can see like their commitment, their contributions, etc. And only after that, we do an investment decision. And then we upskill them to a point that they're job ready and they get job readiness training. They're going through a boot camp and so on and so forth. And then we place them with the employers. So for the employers, we basically do already like a big like vetting of the talents within the 6 months before. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see also then correlations with regards to retention rates, income progression, and job placements, etc., so that we can make our model better and better, because we invest into talent. So we take an investment decision. So it's like for us very important that our investments are actually like yielding returns. So we are completely aligned with the employers, because we are not just like an agent to the talent, but like we only win if the talent becomes successful in the future and earns a higher salary in the future and stays with the companies.
That's very interesting. Quite interested in hearing about that, how you're using AI to actually help you screen video interviews, which is very, very cool. Do you think it's important to like think about how we use those large language models for streamlining all of the things that we do in our business, like operational, talent acquisition, wherever we are, not just for developers? Tell me, Lawrence, I think you touched on it a little bit, but what are you doing to prevent a bad hire? There's definitely things that you're looking out for. Is there anything else that you didn't cover in your initial answer?
I don't think there's anything specifically, but I have seen the question pop up in terms of using third-party analysis for soft skills. And
Yes.
that's one of the things that we found, like, again, with the highly competitive market, developers are applying at 20, 30 places at the same time. And if you are going to draw out a process too much, you will lose them very quickly. So we have personally chosen to go down the personal route. So all of our talent team will test the soft skills with the developers first, or with the specific techies, not only developers, to be honest. And then from there only will they be given a technical test and then be put in front of an interview panel on a more technical level as well. Preventing a bad hire will come down to the people doing the interview, and it's going to come down to experience. And you know what? It happens. You have to be careful, but it's going to happen, and then you have to have your mechanisms in place to be able to deal with that.
Fair enough. And I like the way that you've actually framed it in a really nice, positive way. Like, how do you make yourself competitive for top talent out there, right? So you talked about making the hiring process like fast and efficient, personal, even. Like, anything else that you're doing that you think is like key to making a good impression?
Honestly, I think making it personal is a big thing. We've gotten a lot of feedbacks from interviews at the end where they said it was one of the nicest interviews that they've participated in, and it's really a good pat on the back to hear. So I think making it personal, that's the key.
That's great. It's easy to get negative feedback. It's not always so easy to get positive feedback. Felix, keen to hear from you. What do you think about strategies that companies can use to prevent making a bad hire? You have anything in mind?
I mean, you cannot prevent it completely, right? So what Lauren said, like, you need to have also the processes in place that if, like, you see on the show, you can do interviews and all of that, but ultimately, like, after a month or two, like, you relatively quickly see if someone is a fit or not. And relatively early, you usually then already have a gut feeling. And what's important is to also then take the decision to rather stop early than to invest more time and try to get it fixed. So I think that's just as important as taking the right hiring decision is to have the right firing mechanisms in place, so to say. So that's maybe something to add there. And ultimately, like, I would even say, like, the most important is that you're so attractive as an employer or as a program that the best people will come to you because you have the best brand and you offer the best services and the best, like, environment to work in and to grow. So that will be then become a self-fulfilling prophecy because the best of the best will come to you and want to work for you. And that's the much better strategy than to try to optimize on the funnel, because you can only work with what is in the funnel, right?
Yep, that's such a great point. Yeah, and interesting also, like, if you're talking about this market being quite tough to attract senior developers, I liked Lauren's point from earlier, which is like focusing on career paths, making sure that people have a clear sense of where they could grow in your business. Specifically, if you're a business that's struggling to, it's a little bit tougher maybe in this market to sweeten the offer with a bit of an increase or promise an increase within 6 months. So you have to think about the other types of things that your candidates value and that are going to motivate them to stick around and be excited about joining your business. Yeah.
And Annelie, that's also like a point which is really important to note if you look at remote hiring, because the problem is that I'm seeing is a lot of companies hiring remotely and they treat their remote hires completely different than, like, their on-site people, right? So, like, they talk about the culture that they have and, like, what funny things they do together and whatnot. But then the remote people are a little bit in a silo and they're excluded from this. So it's really important to think about, like, what is basically like the membership support that you give to your people, right? So that they want to stay in your system, in your community for the next 3, 4, 5 years, and not just like are there to make a little bit of money and then basically like if there's another job coming around, they hop on to another job, right? So that's with remote, it's much easier to change jobs. So you need to invest much more into actually like retaining your people and offering services around like your paycheck to these people, so that they're happy to stay.
That's such a good point. It's like, when we talk about hiring, or when we talk about scaling teams, hiring is only a part of that whole journey, right? It's like how you retain people, how you set them up for success. All of that stuff is part of the package. And Felix, just to your point about also having a good, I'm going to say firing strategy to back up your hiring strategy. Yeah, it is about being decisive, I think. I always think about it in terms of like, it needs to be a good fit for both the candidate and the company, right? So even though it's not ideal if the opportunity doesn't work out, that is still better than having someone in a position where they're going to be struggling or they're going to be unhappy. And so I back that being decisive is better for all parties involved.
Yeah, and that's also very difficult. Then, so what we've done, we have hired people from overseas and brought them to Germany with visa and all these processes, and then like you work on that for 3, 4, 5 months, and then they start, and then you find out, oh, it doesn't work so well. So like now you have already had all that sunk cost, so you think, let's invest a little bit more, right? So that's another thing when we talk about hiring remotely, to think about, okay, what's the best setup to test and to work together with someone before like you bring someone over, like, and bring someone to Berlin or to Paris or Frankfurt, and do go through all these visa requirements, which is often a topic if you want to work with someone overseas, because these people often want to come to Germany and to France or wherever, right?
That's such a great segue, actually, because I've been reading about this last week. I've been reading about the concept of work trials, which is quite tricky, right? If you're trying to get someone to work with you temporarily, it's not that easy to get a week off your current job, for example, or even a day in some cases. I know at OfferZen we do what we call simulation days, and sometimes we do it in as little as half a day, but we essentially get someone to be a part of the team that they're going to be joining for a day, give them some work. In some cases, in the developer team, they can, or the engineering team, they can work on the live code base, within limits. But it is possible to get a taste of, how this person is going to fit in. Obviously, there's quite a bit of effort that goes into it, but it's such a great opportunity to sell as well, right? You want to get people excited about joining this team, as well as trying to figure out what they're going to be contributing to the team. Lawrence, have you had any experience with something like that? If I talk about a work trial, is that something sound like something doable, or what do you think?
From our perspective, I don't think it's very doable. Like I've mentioned earlier, it's a very competitive hiring process, and if you're going to stretch it out over 3 months or longer, it's going to be difficult. Perhaps with the more junior resources, it's definitely a possibility. But then again, you need to have the projects available to be able to keep these people engaged on projects. So it would be a challenging situation in our current model.
Yes, totally fair enough. Speed is what you're optimizing for, speed and quality at the same time, I think. So there's like a delicate balance that you're already managing. Felix, it sounds like you were heading in that direction or thinking that's a good idea. Do you have experience running something like that?
I mean, we do it now with our cohort, right? So they go through a trial phase before we take the ultimate decision to see if the fit is there, if they are reliable, if they show the commitment, etc. Before we then further invest into the education and the job placement, etc. of our members, because it costs us a lot of money to bring someone to a certain level. And the other thing is, what I wanted to say is, like, if you cannot do this trial yourself, then it all comes back for me to trusting a reliable source. Right. So like, I mean, you maybe know that. So like from a business side, like when I hired an intern, for instance, for my business school that I went to, 95% chance probability that was a success. I knew like what they're capable of. I knew which mindset they have, like which cultural fit they most likely have. And I think that is super important, to find sources where you know, okay, you're going to get a high quality from that. And that's sometimes difficult if you go like to marketplace, because like the marketplace is not always, I know like OfficeCent does it already quite well. It's not always vetting the talent and basically giving you like this digital CV of the candidate to know exactly like what you're signing up for, right? So that's something we're also like trying to tap in with Project Y, because that's something which is, in my view, very much missing from the market. I guess like if you hire someone from BBO or something like that, then as well, there's probably a high chance that if this person like worked there for 2 years, that they come with a certain quality. If you hire someone from McKinsey in the business world, you are like, oh, there's worked for McKinsey, so like it must be good, right? So like maybe personal fit, we don't know, but like you have the trust that like there's a brand behind. And that's what I mean with like finding channels where you source from, where you rely on, and where you also have ideally an influence on the talent pool already during the education phase or upskilling phase or whatsoever.
Great. That feels to me at least like a very good segue. I promise Felix and I didn't rehearse this, but if you're talking about finding good sources and channels for talent, I'm keen to chat a little bit about emerging markets and how we tap into those. When budgets are tight and markets are competitive, especially if you're in Europe hiring from the European market, like where else are you looking? Are you considering potentially, let's say, the South African market? Obviously, that's where OfficeZen started. It's something we're very passionate about. We sort of generally do a lot of like surveys of developers in our community. We don't just speak to developers who are currently looking for work. We try to cast the net a bit wider. We've been surveying SA developers on what they would like to, the kinds of jobs that they would like to get. And it seems like a large proportion of them are very much interested in finding international work opportunities, right? So we've got in our last survey something like 97% of developers being keen to work for international companies. So that could be either remotely or, with an eye to relocate to different companies or to different countries, sorry. The same percentage, almost 97% of them prefer remote or hybrid positions. So that puts them already in a good position to maybe take on a role overseas without having to relocate immediately. And as many as 90% of those developers also have experience working remotely. I think all of us have gone through a bit of a remote working bootcamp over the COVID period. So even though there's still some logistical challenges around load shedding, etc., you have a good chance of finding someone who has some experience working remotely. So you don't have to start from scratch. Obviously, also a talent market that's generally English proficient, has shorter notice than the European countries, and so there's less, trying to coordinate. If you want to work synchronously, that's a pretty easy thing to get off the ground. So starting with Lawrence again, you have experience hiring from quite a few talent pools, not just South Africa. So maybe you can give us a quick sense of that. And anything that stands out about the SA market from your perspective.
Well, I think mostly in the whole emerging markets sector, we found that it's very difficult for us to access local supply where we are in Europe right now. The local talent tend to go to the larger organizations when I'm talking like the big 500. So it's a great way for us to meet in the middle and find some great talent in the emerging markets. We've been hiring from Brazil, we've been hiring from Eastern Europe, and we've been hiring from Portugal. We also have our office in India, but we've also been recruiting into Europe from India as well. And the big thing for us there is we found in a lot of these geographies is, first of all, there's an affordability to it. But second of all, these people are very adaptable, usually very eager, and have a very, very high work ethic. And it's just one of those things that shine through. If we can get to the fact that language is no longer a problem and it's a cultural fit, then usually the clients are very impressed by the people that we present.
Excellent. I think, Felix, you've spoken a little bit about the challenges of maybe hiring remotely, but I think you'll have a strong pitch for SA Talent in this conversation. What would you say?
No, absolutely. I mean, I have struggled hiring South African talent, right? And that's like also like the project why I want to present a response to employers who are looking to hire from South Africa, because I have experience myself. And I think what are the points for South Africa is like it's the same time zone, or like more or less the same time zone. People speak English. You have like so many talents here. You have good schools, etc. You have good boot camp markets, and there's just a lot of people that are very desperate, so to say, because there are no jobs. So, like in South Africa, we have a 60% youth unemployment rate. That means like out of the 1 million people that graduate from high school every year, 600,000 will never find a job. So like we have now people also like applying for Project Y. They have master's degrees, like in computer science, and they cannot find a job, right? That's completely different if you look at Europe, whereas there's much more like, supply of jobs. So I think that is just, if you look at the pure quantity of available talent and how hungry they are to make it and what work they will put in, like that's amazing with the time zone, with the accessibility here in South Africa. So obviously there's also a lot of obstacles like load shedding, like the fluctuation that we see, but all these things, like with employer of record models, with like what is like Project Y, to have the people sitting in a joint workspace, like managed workforce. These are things that are solvable. And I think what's also very interesting about South Africa is that people are very nice and very friendly and very open, and they have a good swag. So it's like from a European perspective, it's like from a cultural perspective, actually works quite well. Whereas like we have sometimes struggled with like hires from Asia or something, where the cultures are much like a bit more different, I would say. So I think that's very open-minded and talkative and outgoing. So like it's that's great to see.
That is a lovely testimonial for South African talent. Maybe just to dig a little bit deeper on that that one comment that you made before we go to the questions is, like how do you think about overcoming cultural differences? I think there's a little bit of resistance from people who haven't necessarily hired from a specific market, not being sure how to integrate new team members into the team, not being sure what to expect. What kind of advice would you give to someone that's trying to integrate a new market, a new set of developers into their team? Lawrence, I'm going to go with you because I know you mentioned a couple of different markets you hire from, so it feels like you've got a recipe for success there.
Well, in experience, we found that people relate actually quite easily. The biggest thing for us is to build culture, is to try and get in-person time as much as possible. For people to build some form of relationship and friendships within the work. Fully remote just doesn't give you a platform to build a office culture, especially again in the consultancy space, where most of the people will be on client side or working hybrid. So encouraging people to meet up at the office and collaborating on some challenges they have, share the challenges they're having at work, and share the knowledge, create a platform where they can share knowledge with one another. I think we are looking for certain personality types in this situation. You're looking for people that are usually self-starters, people who are talkative, like you've mentioned. And again, it comes back to the interview. We need to test for these things during the interview to make sure that it will fit into the culture of the people that are already there.
Great. I'm sorry, I feel like we ran out of time a little bit on that last topic, but on the plus side, if you are curious about everything that you need to know to be able to hire South African talent. We're going to share a link at the end of this webinar. It'll be on the screen as we close off the session. OfficeZen's put together a set of resources. So it's basically a guide to hiring South African developers. It has some data and some guidance that you can leverage if you are considering hiring from the South African market. That'll be super useful. Great. I'm going to go to questions because I see we did get a couple throughout the session. Firstly, from Katie, in the current market and with all the cuts from large tech industries, is it worth looking for new opportunities, or should I rather stay where I am? Felix, any thoughts on that?
I think we need to precise the questions because I know where she is.
Okay. Okay, interesting. I think from my perspective, it's always tough to make a move. I would say it's still worth to see what's out there, and to be just very clear on what you're trying to optimize for, right? So if you're trying to make a big step jump in your salary, I don't think now is going to be a very satisfying point in time to do it. But I think if you do it for the right company and you end up in a position to grow your career from there, the next 2 or 5 years could look very different. So I think you have to just think a little bit more long term when you make the decision to be able to assess whether it's a good move right now. Lawrence, what would you say? You've chatting to candidates, since the beginning of the year, 50 of them. What do you say to them when they're wondering about it?
I think a very honest conversation is the biggest thing here. It's a difficult market out there, yes, but the first question you need to ask yourself is why you're moving. And like you've mentioned, if it's for salary, maybe rethink it. But and there's also good reasons to move for salary, don't get me wrong. But you need to ask yourself the question, are you happy in your current position? Are you happy in your current career? And if you're not happy, then I would definitely encourage you to go seek something that would scratch that itch.
We see that every year when we do our State of the Dev Nation surveys. Generally, what people are trying to optimize for is growth. So if you think on a longer time frame, I think there's plenty of opportunities out there. You just need to figure out, why you're moving and whether this is a good fit based on that reason. Going with Giselle Duplessis, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. How do you ensure that there isn't bias in your AI screening process? Often the training data can skew towards bias. How do you combat that? Felix, I think that's something you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't rely on the AI completely. So like what the AI helps us is to filter out, let's say 80% of the cases where we would be in an interview and relatively quickly would see it's not a fit, right? But I think like we need to train the more data we get, if we have like 10,000s, 100,000s of interviews at some point, that we can train the AI and explain the AI like how we rated the answers, it gets better and better. But obviously like to rely on it at this point in time would be like a bit dangerous, and we would never replace a personal interview with it. That's for sure.
Got you. I think there's a lot of hype around it, and I think obviously the possibilities are endless and very exciting, but in the short term, you probably want to make sure that you have strong human systems working in parallel to make sure you're training the models in the right direction. Great. I think I'm going to try squeeze in one more question from Manse. He asks, or they ask, when interviewing, what would a casual conversation look like, and what are some of the questions you would ask in that casual conversation? That feels like another one for Lawrence.
So typically what I like to do in these situations is first of all set up a scenario at work, get a person's approach to certain things, how they react to being challenged, how they react to having made a mistake, stuff like that, and then slowly transition as well into some of their personal life. Are you married? What does your partner do? Do you have any kids? Do you have any dogs? Do you have any hobbies? I know it's a cliche, but it's very big to make the interview personal for me. I feel people, again, honesty is a big thing, and people become more honest the more they can share about their dachshund or their French bulldog, and that's a big thing, is making it personal.
I love that. It's when you get someone to talk about something they're excited about, right? And
Yes.
similarly, if you got me to talk about my 2 rescue terriers, I would certainly enjoy that. Great.
Do we have another half an hour for that?
Unfortunately not. There's not enough time. 1 minute to go. Lawrence, you've had, I'm going to give Felix the last word if you don't mind. Felix, any thoughts to wrap us up before I just do a quick end off with a special offer that I want to share with participants?
On the question that you asked before?
On the conversation as a whole,
yes.
I'm asking you to finish us off. Sorry, that's a big ask.
Okay. Yeah, I think to sum it up, I believe if you're looking for remote hires, find a trusted source, make sure that they have a good infrastructure to work in and work with peers in the community and keep the retention high, make sure that they're supported and you don't see them as cheap labor, but invest into their future. And make sure that you check out employer of record models if you want to hire remotely, because I think it's a great way to take the administration burden from you.
That's an excellent point. On that note, I just want to say we are able to offer you guys 10% off your recruitment costs via OfferZen and as much as 20% off your payroll fee. So if you just indicate whether you're interested or not in the poll that Alex just posted, we'll be able to send you more details. I think that's a really great offer and a nice way to kickstart, especially those of you that said you're considering hiring remotely, but you haven't necessarily dipped your toes into that yet. As I mentioned before, when the webinar ends, you'll be redirected to our South African Developer Hiring Hub. Thank you so much, Felix, Lawrence. Sorry that we ended up on the dogs and not on something development related, but really, really appreciate all your inputs into the conversation this evening. I thought it was super productive and appreciate the time and effort that you put in. Hopefully our audience also benefits from that.
Thank you, Annalie, and everybody else who attended. Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
Have a lovely.
Thanks so much. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.